The 223, the 5.56, one of, if not the most popular centerfire rifle cartridge in America. There are a plethora of different ammo choices, but today we're going to drill down on the big three popular grain weights. The 55 grain, the 62 grain, and the 77 grain. We'll talk about the history, the philosophy, the use cases for the military and for the civilian. Stay tuned. Well, hello there, gunfighters. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the correct way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host today. Bio is in the show notes. I have done a lot of content before on the 223 and the 5.56 and the AR-15 and, the 5.56 versus the 7.62 by 39, all kinds of things. So if this episode doesn't cover those things you might think are interesting, type in the search bar, Gunfighter Life, and then whatever those keywords are, and you'll probably find it. Because today we're really talking about these different loads. It works out handily today that we go in order of grain weight, because that also goes in the order of kind of their mass adoption and use as a standard grain weight by the military and by civilians. Now, way back in the mid-50s, the AR pattern rifle was getting adopted. Initially in a 308 is what it was developed in, the AR-10. The military wanted something different. They wanted something kind of radically different. It wasn't the first high-velocity, small-caliber cartridge by far, but it was, I think, the first mass-adopted as a mainline infantry weapon, high-velocity, small-caliber rifle round. Lightweight, you can carry a lot of ammo. That was kind of the big attributes of this cartridge. Again, radically different. There were intermediate cartridges before this, and this is an intermediate cartridge, but different, far different ballistically and characteristics in many ways than the 8 Kurtz and the 7.62 by 39. You might even throw in like the M1 carbine in there, radically different than those. These cartridges in the civilian world were thought of as varmint hunting cartridges. Well, the military wanted to adopt those as fighting cartridges. Enter the 223, and adopted by the military and NATO as the 5.56 millimeter NATO. Now, I'm not going to go into the differences. There's very small differences between the cartridges. For all intents and practical purposes, practical downrange performance, they're basically the same. If you blow yourself up or your gun up, lose some fingers, destroy your gun, destroy your face, that's your fault, not my fault. Check to make sure your gun is good for your ammo. I know I miss my calling as a lawyer. I really don't like the litigious nature of the society we live in today. But marching on, the 223, the 5.56 was adopted. I believe, unless there was some experimental stuff I'm not aware of, the round that was adopted was the 55 grain full metal jacket, also known as the XM193. Now, the XM193 is loaded by a lot of manufacturers. I'm sure they're not all identical, but they're both basically a 55 grain bullet. Full metal jacket. Now, I did a bunch of posts today when I was doing research, linking articles for patrons on Patreon. This one, to give credit where it is due, is from Battleborn Review. I'll either be quoting from my own memory and hopefully knowledge on the subject. and I might quote some from this article. Now, something it does mention that I was aware of, although I don't know if I know the exact, I didn't know this much about it. It says the original M16 had a 1 in 14 twist. However, they discovered in extremely cold conditions that was not sufficient for stabilizing 55 grain projectiles, so the M16A1 had a 1 in 12 twist to remedy that issue. It says while a 1 in 12 is ideal for a 55 grain bullet, it is generally accurate enough in 1 in 9 and even 1 in 7 twist barrels. Stepping out of that article, this is one thing. There are a lot of other rifles chambered in 223 and 5.56 that may not be ARs. Either they're a little bit older or they're just a bolt action or something. And again, make sure your rifle can fire this kind of ammo. But if you have that slower twist rate, this might be a good option for you. Again, there's a lot of other grain weights besides 55 that are even lower than 55. Down into 30-some grain bullets. I used to load 36 grain varmint grenades when I did a bunch of prairie dog hunting. It says the M193 is generally considered to be accurate enough for combat use out to around 500 yards. There's a lot of good things in this article, and again, it's from a Battleborn review. It lists, and this is something that I didn't know, it lists the fragmentation threshold at 2,700 feet a second. It lists velocities. Now, these are going to vary depending on your rifle, weather condition, humidity, if you sneezed or not, all kinds of different things. But rough numbers, it gives 20-inch barrel, 3,200 feet a second. And 20 inches was the original M16, A1, A2, and A4. 20-inch barrel, 3,200 feet a second. 16-inch, 3,100 feet a second. 14.5 at 3,000. And an 11.5 at 2,800. Now this is where it gets interesting. It lists if you take the fragmentation velocity at 2,700 with a 20-inch barrel, fragmentation out to 200 yards. Again, the bullet will go much farther than that. It will still be deadly much farther than that, but if you want that fragmentation, it lists the velocity 20-inch barrel at 200 yards, a 16-inch barrel at 150 yards, a 14.5 at 100 yards, and an 11.5 at only 40 yards, giving you that fragmentation velocity. I know this is really basic, but people from different places in their gun fighting journey listen all the time. Nobody popped out of their mom's womb with a ballistics chart. When you cut down a barrel, you almost always, in practical rifle sizes and practical cartridges, lose velocity. The longer the barrel, the more powder is burned inside that barrel, generally generating greater velocities. So when you start chopping off that barrel, you lose velocity. It's one of the things, again, that the military wanted was a high velocity, small caliber round. Force equals mass times velocity squared. Velocity is a key component to energy. Pretty good article on that 55 grain load. We'll come back to maybe if you should consider it and why later. And other 55 grain loads. There are a lot of other 55 grain loads, and there are a lot of other kind of copycats that are just 55 grain full metal jackets that may not be true M193 or XM193. But we'll come back to that. Let's talk about the 62 grain. So what I used in the Marine Corps, what I used in the Army. Now they're on to the newer version of it, but it's still a 62 grain, lovingly referred to as green tip, the M855. This is a 62 grain. This was not an American choice. This was a NATO choice. Without getting into too much of the history, I believe it was one of the European countries that came up with this, and NATO decided to adopt it. And although we had came up with a 55 grain and came up with the round, I don't know if saying we got stuck with it is a fair assessment, but we got stuck with it. We got saddled with the 62 grain green tip M855. This is a little bit different. Not just a common full metal jacket, lead core copper jacket. It has a steel penetrator. You can argue whether it's armor piercing or not armor piercing, barrier penetrating, light armor piercing. Here's what it is. It's a copper and lead bullet with a steel, call it a nose cone, in the forward end of the bullet, which aids in penetration. This one that I sent out to the patrons today. Tacticalshooting.com is where I found a good article. I did quite a bit of research on this today, but I'm going to quote a little bit from this article. The M855, also known as green tip, or SS109, that's not as common, but you may hear that, SS109. Designed for enhanced penetration, featuring a 62 grain bullet with a featuring a steel core and a full metal jacket. It is recognized for its ability to penetrate intermediate barriers like auto glass, sheet metal, and plywood more effectively than standard FMJ ammo, but is not classified as armor piercing. The steel core in the bullet is intended to aid in penetration, but can adversely affect accuracy and is considered less effective against soft targets compared to the older 55 grain M193 load. This is me commenting on that. I think that's spot on. The green tip I have never found to be very accurate. Period. It's a more complicated bullet to manufacture. The more complicated stuff you start throwing in there, the more potential you have for introducing inconsistency. And inconsistency is a killer of accuracy. Everything's not plumb and centered and perfect in there, or let's say nothing's perfect. The less perfect it is, the more you're going to get thrown off of center, which can really hurt your group size. Let's say 1 out of 3 or 4 of those has a slightly off-center steel penetrator. Well, that might hurt you in accuracy. Also, I'd say this has a less than stellar, lackluster reputation for terminal performance. Can you kill somebody? Sure, we used it for 20 years in the GWAT. We use other stuff too, but mainly this. You're trading off, like many things in the ballistic world here. You're trading off accuracy, you're trading off, in my opinion, better terminal performance on soft targets for some barrier penetration. You should decide whether that juice is worth the squeeze. This lists, there's many manufacturers of the XM193, there are many manufacturers of green tip of M855. It lists a couple here. It lists a Winchester M855, and it doesn't list, I don't see the barrel length listed in here, so I'm assuming it's a 20-inch barrel, just in my head based on velocity, but it gives Winchester M855 at just over 3,000 feet a second at 3060. It lists PMC M855 at 3,100. So I shouldn't say obviously, because again, people come into this from different backgrounds, but if you're loading it to a similar pressure, when you add bullet weight, you must decrease velocity. That's how physics works. So you're looking at a slightly heavier bullet at slightly lower velocities. Reading from the article again, the M855 is contrasted with the M193, the latter having a traditional lead core being deemed more suitable for soft targets. The M855 bullets are a bit longer because they've got a steel tip, which means they need a faster spin to fly straight. Stepping out of that article, going back to twist rate again, a 1 in 9 is fine for these 62 grain. Now, the military went to faster twist rate mostly for tracers. The tracers, because they carry that light generating compound in there, they're longer than a regular bullet of the same weight. So those need to be spun faster to stabilize. 62 grain should do fine in say a 1 in 9. And that's not really standard anymore, but a lot of the older, just going back a few years, a lot of those older guns are going to be a 1 in 9. And that's fine for a 1 in 9. Okay, let's march on. Again, we'll come back to this in different 62 grain loads. Not every 62 grain load is the M855, but it's by far like a common staple in the gunfighting world. This article that I linked, some of this is going to be from memory. I'll try and give credit when I'm talking from the article, but this article that I linked in Patreon is from shootingtimes.com. I like to give credit where it's due. But we talked about that 62 grain green tip never having stellar reputation when it comes to stopping bad guys, to stopping adversaries. Some specialized units in the military And I read today, I don't remember if it was this article or another article, I read today that it was initially developed for the Army Marksmanship Unit. Like many things in the tactical world, for those of you that kind of don't or poo-poo competition shooting is usually 20 years ahead of law enforcement and military adoption of stuff, right? Competition shooters were running red dots on handguns 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Competition shooters were running LPVOs on rifles way before it was a common thing in military law enforcement use. And there's many other things too, but we see here the Army's, although a military unit, they're a competition shooting military unit, the Army Marksmanship Unit. If what I read today was in fact true, I had always heard that it was for special forces units. But the Army Marksmanship Unit may have been the first one to ask for Mk262. And what they wanted was a more accurate downrange cartridge. Black Hills jumped on that. Black Hills is kind of known, if you're kind of a ammo aficionado and you like the finer things in life, you may be familiar with Black Hills. Many other people may have just heard about it, but they're like a high-end, I won't say boutique, but let's say semi-custom kind of ammo manufacturer. They're not what you go to when you're looking to buy bulk cheap ammo, let's put it that way. But Black Hills did some experimenting, different loads, and they came up with the 77 grain loaded with a Sierra bullet. I think it was a Sierra Match Gang 77 grain. They came up with this load, and it did really well at longer ranges, very accurate. And I don't know if it was by happenstance or if they did this from jump, but it tended to do better ballistically than the 62 grain green tip, which again may just be happenstance, may have been by design, but that's not hard to do. That's like saying trying to develop a faster car than a Volkswagen Beetle. It's not exactly setting the bar very high. But they found that it did better on both, I think, on accuracy and on terminal performance. It is kind of known as the creme de la creme, the Mk262, in which it was adopted. The Mk262 and I think it's the Mk262 Mod 1 now. There's some minor variations that probably to you and I won't make much difference. But the Mk262 you often see it referred to as the Mk262 or 77 grain OTM match, open tip match. This is coming from that Shooting Times article. I didn't know this what year it was. 1996, a retired Army officer approached Hoffman about pursuing a newly announced Army Marksmanship Unit ammo contract. It says here in this article, and again, do your own research. By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter is established. Black Hills won the contract to produce 80 grain 223 ammo for 600-yard target work. In 1999, Hoffman was approached by engineers from Naval Surface Warfare Center about developing a load for an accurized suppressed M16 that was eventually called the Mark 12 Special Purpose Rifle. Built from old mothball M16A1 lowers and had 18-inch barrels. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Several bullets were used during the development process, including 73 grain Berger, 77 grain Sierra Match King, and 77 grain Nosler boat tail or hollow point bow tail. Black Hills finally settled on the Match King when Sierra agreed to put a cantilever on the bullet. It says down here, accuracy was exceptional, certainly an improvement over M855. He says, we've come a long way from that and have reported successful engagements past 800 yards, and I've shot out to 1100 with it. It says I think this is important. I'm skipping ahead again. The Mk262 Mod 1 projectile is an open-tipped match bullet, though it does not expand in the manner of conventional hollow points. Just because something, this is me interjecting, just because something is called a hollow point doesn't mean it's designed to expand. Many of these target bullets are not designed to expand in the manner of a conventional hollow point. In fact, the hollow cavity is not there to induce expansion, and it's there to put the majority of weight towards the projectile's rear so that it can be more stable in flight and increase accuracy. Because it is not designed to expand and cause undue suffering, this critical phrase in Hague Convention regarding ammunition, the Navy's Judge Advocate General Corps approved the round for use in combat. Skipping ahead again, when the bullet strikes soft tissue, the heavier base comes around and causes a bullet to yaw or tumble. The hollow nose cone breaks off, and often the bullet fragments at that cantilever. Okay, so this 77 grain is one, the new kid on the block, and two, kind of seen as the creme de la creme for accuracy and terminal performance compared to the 62 grain green tip. This is going to require your faster twist rates. I believe a 1 and 8 will do it, but a lot of the newer ARs are a 1 and 7, and that will be fine for the 77 grain. Now, let's talk about their use and effect for you. The 55 grain is almost certainly going to be the most affordable. Although sometimes you get a good deal, you get a good sale, and you might argue that the 62 grainers aren't much more expensive. But 55 grain, generally, if you're buying bulk ammo and doing a bunch of training, 55 grain is going to be your most affordable. Also, if you're talking about really affordable ammunition, 55 grain in the full metal jacket realm, and I'm not advising that you do this, but if you're stockpiling, if you're into prepping and the survival, I'm not saying this should be your philosophy, but I'm saying if you're stockpiling a bunch of ammo, out of all the full metal jacket options, which is almost always going to be your cheapest option, the 55 grain full metal jacket does fairly well for a full metal jacket. I'm not recommending this for home defense. I'm not recommending it for your go-to police rifle, your truck gun. I'm not recommending it for that for you. I'm just saying, because it's a high velocity and it tends to fragment, it can do okayer than other full metal jacket rounds that are of slower velocity. So we got cheap, we got it does okay in full metal jacket. It's a good varmint round. If you want like a crossover varmint cartridge, coyote and down, it's good for that, the 55 grain. There are also a lot of other really good loads in 55 grain. One of my favorite ones for like urban operations, I've used it for a long time. I can't even remember when I first started using it, but it's Federal True, TRU. It stands for Tactical Rifle Urban. You know, in the tactical community, if you want to be even more tactical, you sprinkle an acronym on it, right? The Tactical Rifle Urban. But it's a good round. Spear also makes a gold dot in a 55 grain round. So if you're looking for a premium defensive round, there are a lot of options in 55 grain. Here is what I generally do. If your rifle likes 55 grain and it shoots it well and it is reliable with it, because you have to test all these things, because I like to do high volume practice, like say go to a training class where it might be 2,000 rounds or something like that, right? Get a good full metal jacket affordable training round and then find a good, better than full metal jacket terminal performance round that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact. You may not find this, but you may find that, let's say, Federal loads a 55 grain American Eagle M193 type load that shoots pretty close to a Federal Tactical Rifle Urban 223 round. Soft point, made for better terminal performance with all the bells and whistles, nickel-plated cases, water-sealed and oil-sealed primers, good projectile bullet technology, right? You get the idea. So you might find a match. You might find, a bulk M193 round that shoots the same as a Spear Gold Dot 55 grain. And it may not. You have to test it. But if you find a good pairing like that and you can train with one and shoot the other, let's say a 55 grain 223 Hornady Frontier, which is kind of their budget one in a full metal jacket, and then a Hornady 55 grain soft point or hollow point made to expand and do well in soft targets, that may be a good pairing. Again, 55 grain, unless you find a really good sale, but in general is going to be a little bit more affordable. It's also lighter if you're talking about hundreds of rounds, but I mean the difference between 55 grain and 62 grain as far as like stacking magazines, unless you're talking about landing a landing craft on a beach, like it's not going to add up to a ton as far as the individual rifleman, but it is lighter. And again, since it's lighter, all other things being equal barrel length and things like that, it's generally going to be higher velocity. So if you're a lighter weight, high velocity kind of guy, and I'm not always, but in the case of the 223, I kind of am. I tend to lean this way. That doesn't mean it's the right answer. Now let's talk about the 62 grain. 62 grain, kind of your middle of the road. It's maybe not as affordable as 55 grain, but it's not much more expensive because it's really, really common, because the military has been using it, NATO's been using it. You know, even green tip is pretty affordable for having a barrier penetrating round. If barrier penetration is an important attribute to you, if you think that's something you need in your life, you're probably going to settle on 62 grain. Now, I'm not advocating that you use green tip for your home defense round. It's, again, not very accurate. But you may be able, if you want accuracy, you may be able to find a 62 grain, just regular FMJ cup and core bullet that is more accurate. You may be able to find a green tip that shoots same point of aim, point of impact if you do your research and do your testing. So you get that light barrier penetration. And then there are also several good loads in a 62 grain made for terminal performance. Not the green tip, but a soft point, a hollow point made to expand, made for law enforcement, made for terminal performance. You and I didn't sign the Hague Convention of 1890 something. We didn't sign that. You're not bound to that. You can use better rounds than the military uses. So you may decide you want the 62 grain. You may decide you want a little bit more weight, and you'll forego a little bit of velocity. There is, again, because it is one of the standard weights, it has a lot of different options. Even just in M855, there's a bunch of different companies that just load that one load. So it's kind of a middle of the road round. So there's its attributes. But if you want some light barrier penetration, which sometimes the mission calls for that, sometimes that's an advantage, but you will probably leave some accuracy on the table, and you'll probably leave some terminal performance on the table. But if you're willing to forego all that, like many other things in the ballistic world, things are a trade-off. If you want barrier penetration, it's not a bad way to go. Now let's talk about the new kid on the block, the creme de la creme, the 77 grain Mark 262. This is a premium round. It's an expensive round. I'm not going to quote like fractions of a cent. Sometimes I'll go on AmmoSeek. They're not a sponsor, but they're just like a search engine, like you would search for flights or hotel rooms. They search ammo in stock. 77 grain, especially Mark 262, actual Mark 262 loaded by Black Hills, is not cheap. You might be able to find decent 308 loads for the price of Mark 262. So for me, for my broad spectrum use, I'm not saying I don't have a specialty case for this round, but for broad spectrum use, that's kind of puts it on the out, because one of the great things about 223, 5.56 is I can train affordably with it. I can take a tactical carbine class with it, and it's affordable. If you start getting up into the cost at or above good 308, I don't care how good Mark 262 is, and it's a phenomenal 223 round, it's still an intermediate rifle round. It is not a 308. It is not a 7.62x51 NATO. It's not that. So when you start getting into the cost at or more than, and I'm not saying it's not worth it. It's, again, the actual Black Hills Mark 220 or Mark 262 is a phenomenal round. But when you start getting at the cost of at or above 308, I kind of look at myself and I'm like, what am I doing? Now, if you just are married to the AR-15 platform and you are going to stick with just the AR-15 and you're just going to stick with 5.56 or 223 because there's all these other cartridges that we could go down a rabbit hole. Maybe you want to go to 6.5 Grendel or 6.8 SPC or maybe a baker's dozen of other cartridges that have tried to dethrone the 223 and have failed. If you're stuck with you're just going to have AR-15, 223, 5.56, that's you're walking down the aisle with that. You're married to that, and you want the very best out of that as far as terminal performance and accuracy goes. Yeah, the Mark 220 or the Mark 262, that's probably it. Assuming your rifle likes it, your rifle is accurate with it. Also, if you really have a special purpose long range AR and you're sticking with 5.56, that's the obvious choice. But it's expensive. There are many other loads in that 77 grain, 70-ish grain weight that are not the Mark 262. You may decide for certain applications you want one of those. You're going to standardize on Mark 262 and you're going to get one of those other loads. Just here's the thing though. One of the things that makes the Mark 262 fantastic is its quality control. There are many other copycats of the Mark 262 that use different bullets, that use different powders, use different things. They may or may not perform at the level of Mark 262. So just because it says 77 grain does not make it Mark 262. I want to throw that out there. Whereas with the other ones, you could probably do better than XM193 or certainly M855 as far as terminal performance and as far as accuracy. You probably won't do, unless your gun just doesn't like it, better with other loads in the 77 grain. Now, I mentioned that the 55 grain is a great varmint load. It's great for coyotes and down. So also would be the 77 grain, 62 grain. More than you need for those things, but not crazy. Deer hunting. I don't think that hunting deer, medium-sized game with a 223 is a good idea. Settle down. I know it can be done. I've been a professional guide. I can't say I've never taken people hunting with that cartridge. I'm saying it's at best marginal. Just like you could hunt deer with a 300 Weatherby. You do what you want. I'm just going to say it's a bit superfluous. You can also hunt deer with a 223. I don't care how you jazz it up. It's not a deer cartridge. It's not a proper deer cartridge. Will it kill a deer? Sure. Lots of things will kill a deer. That doesn't make it a good idea. But I want you to be as ethical as you can be. If you are going to hunt deer with a 55 grain, I would really encourage you to go to all copper. Not because I care about condor specifically, not because I think lead is a scourge on the earth. I mean, it's a naturally occurring element. Not because I'll shoot people with lead, but I won't shoot a deer with lead. Not for any of those reasons, because I just think in a marginal caliber like that, especially if you're going to go 55 grain, I would really look at, if you were doing it on purpose, not like a survival situation, it's just what you had. If you're actually going to go out and actively hunt deer on purpose with a 5.56, I would really encourage you to look at solid copper and a 55 grain. If you're not going to go solid copper, or even if you are, if deer hunting is really on your menu with a 5.56, I would really encourage you to go to the heavier grain weights. And if you're talking about bolt action, you really got to make sure you have the twist rate for it. Many of the newer bolt actions have faster twist rates. Many of your classic 223 bolt actions may have that 1 in 12. So you may be stuck with a 55 grain, in which case, again, see solid copper or monolithic bullets. But if you're going to use a more traditional bullet, lead, look at a bonded bullet in either 62 grain or 77 grain. But if you were going to put deer on the menu for that cartridge, I would, if I could, gravitate towards those heavier grain weights. Just my thoughts on that. Again, you do what you're going to do. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong if you do it. I'm going to say, in my opinion, the 223 is completely and utterly marginal, putting it politely, for a deer. Again, can it be done? Yeah, it certainly can be done. I just want you to make the best choice if you're going to do it. So, quick recap, 55 grain, often your most affordable, highest velocity, all other things being equal. It does okay as far as accuracy. There's a lot of loads for it. The 62 grain is kind of your middle of the road. The green tip, if you want to shoot that, gives you the option for barrier penetration. And there are other cartridges in that grain weight that will offer better, probably both accuracy and terminal performance. 77 grain Mk262 is kind of like your creme de la creme. Like, you want to stick with 223, 5.56, and you want the most accurate, sleekest bullet. You're probably looking at that one. It's gonna be spendy. So those are my kind of wrap-up thoughts on this. What do you guys think on this? Is this way too nerdy? Not nerdy enough? Just nerdy enough as far as ballistics go? Am I talking over your head? Am I not going deep enough? I'm here to serve you guys and help you guys, so I wanna do that. Let me know if you like this. I might do a similar one on 9mm and 115, 124, and 147 grain. I might do one on 308. I might, right, on 150 grain, 168 grain, 180 grains, or similar, if, in fact, it's that interesting. So, with that, I did a little poll today on, and this may have been what sparked my interest in this show idea. It's not just me, it's you guys helping me. So on Patreon today, I put out a poll, and by far, when I asked what was the go-to of the patrons, now, this is not like it's a giant Gallup poll or anything, right? But it was by far 55 grain was the most common go-to, by double the next most common one last I checked, which was a 62 grain, and half again that in the 77 grain. Which is not surprising to me. So, with that, guys, I'm going to start wrapping this up, bringing it in for a landing. Your tactical tip of the day, something that I like to do. 62 grain, and especially green tip, is not my go-to, but I would often have a magazine of it, especially for a truck gun. When I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, obviously when I was in the Marine Corps and the Army, it was kind of a go-to, but when I had a choice, it wasn't my go-to, but I would often have a magazine of it for the barrier penetration. Vehicle rammings, things like that, when I was doing EP work, when I was doing urban operations, that barrier penetration can be a good thing. Now, it didn't shoot exactly where my go-to load did, but I knew it was close enough for close-in work, and I would often carry a magazine of it. Now, there are green magazines, which is what I currently have, like a green magazine. You can just take a magazine and put green tape on it, right? Green tape, green tip. So if you're going for that green tip, you know where it's at. Or paint it green, I don't care, right? But having a magazine of it for that barrier penetration, even if you use something else, it's not the worst idea in the world. So, especially for a truck gun, then it should be your go-to ammo in a truck gun. But if you're in a vehicle, it might be a possibility that you're going to shoot out of your vehicle, through your vehicle, into something, or shoot into somebody else's vehicle for whatever nefarious thing that they're doing to get them to stop doing it. So, just a thought there on your tactical tip. Your tactical verse of the day. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment, and the second like it is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.